This is a presentation on poison ivy. It is very short and a lot more can be said. This is used as an example of what I have asked my scouts to provide in regards to some of their merit badges. This presentation is being done by the Scoutmaster, James B. Reynolds. I am the District Commissioner over Sac and Fox Indian Nations Council. I'm also the Scoutmaster of Troop 237, Kellyville. With a few exceptions, poison ivy almost always will have 3 leaves. They are almond-shaped and the leaves are usually jagged. There are 2 major kinds, and being that Oklahoma is in the central location of the country, we have both versions. The eastern poison ivy is commonly found as a vine. The new growth is light green, the mature is dark green, and in the fall color it turns a bright red. You'll also see a lot of hairs on the vine stem. Leaves can be jagged or smooth, and sometimes it can actually be on the same plant. You look at it in one place, they're jagged, and just below it, it may be smooth. Western poison ivy is more of a shrubbery or a bush. The 2 outer leaves will actually look like mittens. Typically, you can see a thumb sticking out on the bottom side. The new growth is red in the spring, and it changes to a deep green and then to yellow or orange in the fall. Here are a few photos of the different types of poison ivy you may encounter. Eastern poison ivy is shown on the left. There are a couple of different examples here, and as I mentioned before, this is a vine type. You'll usually see it growing up other plants up beside the trees. Again, it has a hairy looking vine. On the right hand side, you'll see the western poison ivy. This will be growing up from the ground, and it also has the distinct mitten version of this, where the 3 leaves that are coming out, the 2 in the back will have mittens like they're opposing thumbs. Poison ivy and similar plants possess a chemical called urushiol in the plant sap. This chemical is not a defense mechanism, so to speak, but it helps the plant retain water. The sap is a thick, milky consistency. It is very sticky, and once exposed to air, it will begin to turn dark. Some scientists consider this to be a superchemical. It is non-water soluble. It can withstand alkali, acid, and alcohol, and also withstand temperatures over 300 degrees Celsius or 575 degrees Fahrenheit. One of the things that I found kind of interesting on this is that in higher carbon dioxide levels, more of this chemical is produced. The potency has more than tripled since the 1960s, and they are actually expecting, if carbon dioxide levels continue to rise, it could triple again in our own lifetime. Approximately 25% of the population are immune to the rashes caused by this chemical. So that's why you see a few people out there who can actually handle this and not wind up with any kind of a rash. And one of the most important aspects that scouts need to know about poison ivy is the first aid. The urushiol actually produces a type of chemical burn. Proper washing and isolating the infected clothing is the #1 procedure for the treatment. Calamine lotion and over-the-counter itch creams are also available. Also, baking soda and kitty litter can be used to some effect. Again, try and think about soaking up oils from the plant, not necessarily trying to treat a burn itself. Also, do not use hot water. Hot water will feel soothing to some, but what it actually does is opens up the pores and allows more surface area for the sap to soak into. Some people believe that once you have a rash, and if you sit there and start scratching on it and stuff, and basically if somebody else touches this rash, that they could possibly spread it to others. In general, that is not exactly correct. Now, if the urushiol chemical happens to still be on the skin, it could contaminate a person, and yes, they could get poison ivy rash from that, but the oozing fluids from the blisters do not spread poison ivy rash. The rash does not also spread. Higher concentrations of the chemical will turn into a rash first and more severe, but then smaller amounts of exposure will turn into a rash later. Because of this, people see it, it'll come out like one day, 2 days later, it'll look like the rash has spread. That was just a lesser exposure. Urushiol can be spread by touching items and then re-exposing the person. If you go over there and open up a doorknob with some of this on your hand, then the next person who follows behind you and handles the doorknob may possibly get it from there. Urushiol can remain on exposed surfaces for years. Exposure can happen from something like dead vines. If your pet happens to brush up against it and then you pet your dog, you could also accidentally get it through there. If you use tools to cut down poison ivy, you can turn around and pick it up off that even after a year or two. Poison ivy, despite the name, is not an ivy. It is actually a member of the cashew and pistachio family. Mangoes can also produce a similar rash because it contains the same chemical. Fruits and leaves are eaten by a lot of animals and birds. That's how it normally gets spread. There are many sayings that relate to poison ivy. About the most common is leaves of three, let it be. That also applies to poison oak. Hairy vine is no friend of mine. That typically applies towards the vine version of poison ivy, the eastern poison ivy. Berries of white, danger in sight. That also refers to the fruit that is generally produced by the poison ivy vines. Down below on this slide, you can see, of course, we got the poison ivy on the left-hand side. This right here is the western version of poison ivy. Poison oak in the middle, which you can see is very similar. And then the poison sumac in Oklahoma is extremely rare. It does exist, but only in the far southeastern corner. There are a lot of poison ivy lookalikes. One of the main ones that really get a lot of attention is Virginia creeper. Similar to poison ivy, it is a vine. It does have jagged edges. The leaves look almost identical, and the bottom part of the leaves a lot of times will also have the mitten-looking formation. Just like poison ivy, light green is the new growth and the dark green is mature leaves. In the picture shown, there is actually poison ivy and Virginia creeper combined. The biggest difference between Virginia creeper and poison ivy that you can see is Virginia creeper has leaves of 5 rather than the leaves of 3. Another one that is very similar to poison ivy is poison oak. Pretty much everything with poison ivy is also true with poison oak. It can be a vine or a shrub. The coloration is the same. Again, leaves of 3, leave it be. The leaves also have a mitten. They also contain urushiol, and you can get a rash from it. And also, you can a lot of times see the mitten formation with the bottom 2 leaves. For all intents and purposes, it's best if you treat this just exactly like you would with poison ivy. The first aid is the same. You want to try and avoid it just the same. The biggest difference in there is instead of having jagged edges, it has rounded edges that look more like oak trees. Despite the appearance of the leaves, there is no relation to the oak trees. One of the biggest confusions occur whenever you're looking at plants that are really young or immature. One example is blackberry. Whenever they are younger, it does somewhat resemble poison ivy. In the picture, you can see the two sitting side by side. You have the jagged edges. You have a little bit of the coloration being the same. The big difference is blackberry always has thorns on the stems, whereas poison ivy always has a smooth stem. Also, the 3-leaf pattern only occurs when the plant is young. Also, if you happen to flip the leaf over on the side, you can tell that the leaves are lighter in color on the bottom versus the top. Other plants also kind of look like this whenever they are very young. For example, elm trees are very well known for having the same type of leaf pattern, and whenever they're young, the leaves are very small, and they may have a three-leaf configuration. As I mentioned, this is a very short presentation where I just go over the basics of poison ivy. There is a lot more to be learned and a lot more to be said about this. I would invite you to go and do your own research. It's always best for you to go find out for yourself what the truth behind a lot of these plants are and share your knowledge with everybody. This is the Scoutmaster thanking you.